Good morning, everyone. My name is Theo Argitis. I am the team leader for Canadian government and economic news at Bloomberg. And I have the pleasure and privilege of speaking to Scott Wielding, the Minister of Finance for the great province of Manitoba. Minister, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks a lot. Great to be with you.
I'd like to go straight into talking about the pandemic. It's top of mind for everyone. And I know Manitoba had, maybe an extended third wave, but it's doing a lot better than maybe some other provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan in particular, in this kind of current wave. Can you just give us an update of where Manitoba is as far as the pandemic is concerned and what you think the outlook is for the province?
Well, I think the outlook is good. We, first of all, have a really high vaccination rate. I think there's actually just over 86% of people that had one dose, and just over 80% that have had two dosages. So Manitoba's in a good spot in respect to that. You're right, we got hit pretty hard from the third wave. Other provinces have gone into a fourth wave. I think ours has just started, but we're nowhere near the situation that other provinces are in terms of the hospitalization, probably because our vaccination levels are quite high. And we also took some proactive measures right off the bat with a vaccine passport. So we introduced that earlier on in summer, and so that's really helped bode, I think, us well. But one thing with the pandemic, you just need to be cautious with it, and so we've taken a cautious approach with the fourth wave. So so far, so good.
And if we do enter, if the province does enter a bit of a surge in cases, what type of response would you say that your government would have to that? Are we going to see lockdowns again? Is there appetite for that sort of thing in Manitoba? If you could, obviously there are a lot of unknowns, but if you could kind of provide any intelligence how the government would deal with a fourth wave, that would be great.
Well, each of the waves have been so different, right? I mean, the first, second, and quite frankly, the third, you had very little, either none or very little vaccination rates. But now that we're in the realm where we have over 85, 86% of people vaccinated, the approach we're going to take is different. So right now, it's more we're allowing people that get vaccinated more access to certain things. We have, as we probably have around the world, is more of a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So right now, our approach would be more, vaccination passports, where you're able to go to movies and restaurants and places where you have close contact with vaccination passports. I don't think right now we're looking at any lockdowns. We wouldn't. We think that it's evolved a little bit. There may be more of a regional approach that we look at because there's certain areas of the province that have less vaccination rates than others. But the major city and the context for Manitoba, our capital city has about 2/3 of the population. And so we have close to 88% of people vaccinated there. So a little bit different from some of the rural areas where the vaccination levels are a little bit lower.
And Manitoba actually didn't have the contraction that other provinces had last year. That means that it's not going to have the bump up this year, maybe as some of the others have, because it didn't have that contraction. I'm wondering if you could give us some type of flavor of the sort of economic outlook that your government anticipates for Manitoba, not just this year, but in the coming years as well.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the contrast, from other provinces, we contrasted a little bit less than other provinces, and we're anticipating GDP growth to be somewhere around 5% for this year. It seems to be a little bit better than when we had forecasted for the budget. So that's where we see happening. Like other provinces, obviously the kind of industries that are close contact, those are the ones that are hit more. Obviously, people have talked about the K-shaped recovery and that sorts of some businesses. In terms of jobs, we lost about 90,000 jobs during the pandemic. About 78,000 of them have come back. Our labor force is around 654,000 or so. So the vast majority of the jobs have come back. And in fact, full-time jobs actually are at a higher level than they were prior to the pandemic. But what has lagged is kind of the part-time employment and sector-specific areas. What you are seeing in some areas, like with restaurants and stuff like that, they are looking for employees, and that's been a big factor over the last number of months or so. So that really has been the story. The rebound is good. Manitoba is fortunate that we've got actually the lowest unemployment rate in the country right now at 5.7%. Same thing with youth unemployment. It's the second highest, or second lowest rather, in the country, and female unemployment is third lowest as well. So in respect to that, those things are going quite well.
I mean, would you say job shortages is actually a bigger problem than employment right now?
In certain sectors, just some of the measures that were taken from the federal government, and a lot of the programs were very good. They complemented the programs the federal and provincial governments moved together, but that caused a bit of a glut, and there's people that have moved away from certain sectors, whether it be restaurants, kind of these types of sectors had been impacted more. So yeah, there is a case where a lot of restaurants are looking for people that work in those sectors right now. So that is a big issue right now.
One issue that you hear about is the severe drought conditions in the prairies. That's having a bit of an impact on the provinces in the region, including your province. Can you tell us how that is impacting your province? Is that an area of concern? And is there anything you can do about it?
Yeah. Well, what we try to do, and that's something that's really impacted Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta quite a bit, the drought-like conditions. So it really has two impacts. Number one, on agriculture and really livestock. So we worked with the federal government to introduce an ag recovery program, some supports for farmers and producers, livestock producers that would be there. So that certainly has been impacted. We have gotten a little bit more rain over the last month, so we're hopeful that's going to make a big difference. The other area where it has an impact, Manitoba is a very robust in terms of our Manitoba hydro or hydroelectricity power. So obviously with less water flowing over the turbine. So it's had an impact on the net income of our hydro electricity Crown Corporation. And so that's gone down. But what we tried to do and what we did in this budget is we put a lot more contingency in our budgets to address those types of issues if there was drought-like conditions. So far, so good. We had our Q1 report that came out just yesterday, in fact. And so we're pretty much on track. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, I guess, $34 million to just over $17-18 billion budget. So it definitely has some impacts. With Canada, there is, and all over the provinces have really robust kind of insurance types of scenarios that farmers tap into. Now with the farms, the yield is, although you're not maybe getting everything off the field per se, the prices are so high in certain areas. I think we should be fine in respect to that. But certainly livestock producers have been impacted dramatically, and the amount of net income from our hydro is something that we're watching.
Yeah, we've seen commodity prices rally over the last little while. I mean, obviously there are some supply issues around. We were just talking about those, but in the longer term, do you think that we are in a bullish environment for commodities, and how do you anticipate that will impact, the province and your finances going forward?
Well, right now we did, from a financial point of view, I think we're going to be on track. All the provincial governments put a lot of money away in contingency to address not just the pandemic. That's obviously the number one issue facing all provinces, but for the Western provinces, kind of the drought-like conditions. So I think we'll be fine on a basis in that respect. But, we really need to see how much, precipitation we get over the next 2 months. And that'll be the tale for the most part. But again, it had more impact on the livestock producers. But, the amount of money they're getting from, some of the crops have been higher. So I think they should be fine. But it's something we certainly need to monitor. We'll have to see how precipitation patterns happen over the next number of years with climate change happening. But we've built enough in our contingencies from a government point of view to address those types of issues. So we're on track so far.
So you just released your public accounts for the year ending March 31st, if I'm not mistaken. Can you give us an overview of what that year looked like?
Yeah, we came in at our budget essentially when we tabled it just about a $17-18 billion budget, just to give you some context. And we finished with about a $2.1 billion deficit. Now, when we first came to office in 2016, we were left with a pretty big financial mess. So we worked really hard. In fact, the year just before the pandemic, we actually finally got into a surplus situation. And then obviously with the pandemic, all governments were moving, hundreds of millions of dollars for supports for, protecting Manitobans through the health and through schools, and then support programs. We invested, again, about just over $2 billion on these types of supports that are in place. Now, Manitoba, I think, fared fairly well with it. In fact, all of the provinces in Western Canada got some sort of credit rating downgrade. We're the only province that didn't get a downgrade with it. So, we think that our forecasts are pretty realistic. And what we really wanted to make sure is that we had a lot of contingency built in this year, because there's just such a variation from what's happening with the pandemic. And so we put $1.2 billion in contingencies. We have quite a bit of that money left if we do have to take some other measures throughout the year of the contingency that we would normally have. We got about $450 million more of supports. That's just for the COVID-related supports. We also, as a province, have something called a rainy day fund. So it's, kind of a fund we tap into if there's some issues. We've got about $550 million there, and some other contingencies we built into the budget. So we feel we're on track here in Manitoba.
So what is the outlook over the next 2-3 years then? You had your budget in April. When you say on track, are you on track relative to the budget that you had released in April? I think that sees you as one of the provinces that's actually closest to balance in 2 or 3 years from now. Then I think in Canada, I don't know if there are any provinces that are closer than you are to that. So what is your outlook over the next 2, 3, 4 years in terms of the finances?
Yeah, so we have a plan. Again, we finished with a $2.1 billion deficit. We're dropping it in this budgetary year to about 1.5, so that we're a little bit ahead of schedule for that. And then it correspondingly drops down. Now, I think all governments have had to really move a lot of heaven and earth, quite frankly, with the supports for individuals. What really has been important, I think has been missing with some other levels of government, is a plan to get yourself back into balance. So we put a plan to get ourselves back into balance over an 8-year time period. We actually put that in legislation. So you'd have to break the legislation to not do that. So it really is a pathway, a plan to get ourselves back into balance. Like all of the governments, the priority right now is to protect our citizens, Manitobans. But we do have a plan to get ourselves back into balance. If you look at our track record as a government for the first really 6 years coming to office, we initially had a plan when we came into office to get back into balance in a short period, and we finished 4 years ahead of schedule. So we do anticipate probably beating that 8-year time frame, but we do think it's realistic. So that's what's important nowadays is managing the finances in, quite frankly, a turbulent time, but have a plan in place of how you're going to do it, how you're going to get yourself back into a balance, taking into consideration promises that governments make. We've obviously got a promise to reduce some of our taxes and stuff. And so we baked everything in terms of our revenues that we would take into an 8-year time plan that we put into legislation. So we're extremely happy that we're on track for that.
And can you tell us anything about how you're financing your deficits? Any changes in kind of duration, or anything you see in the market that have you found particularly interesting or surprising in recent months?
Well, of course, as everyone, when the pandemic started, obviously a lot of the provincial sub-sovereigns had issues obviously getting into the market, and obviously the Bank of Canada took some direct action, which I think has helped things out. If you talk about our borrowing plan, we're expected about $5.7 billion in our borrowing. A lot of it is refinancing. We, of course, are taking on $2 billion more in excess costs this year, so for the deficit component of it. And then we, through our Crown utility, Manitoba Hydro, the hydroelectricity, we had a very expansive program in terms of dam creation. And so those projects that have increased our borrowing capacity over the last number of years are pretty much completed or will be completed over the next number of months. So we do anticipate our net debt to GDP dropping off over the next 2 or 3 years when our borrowing capacity will go down. Really, net debt to GDP, it's made up of two things: your operating, deficits that you run, and so again, we got that 8-year plan to get ourselves back into balance. And our strategic infrastructure borrowing with dams and stuff is really leveling off. So I think you're going to see Manitoba at a high water level, going to be coming down at a pretty good amount of, pretty good pace over the next 2-3 years.
We've just had an election in Canada, not a new government, but it's a new mandate. Do you anticipate any changes in terms of Fed-Prov fiscal relations over the next couple of years?
Yeah, we work fairly well with the federal government. There's always some policy differences that are there, but where there's priorities that kind of meet both governments' needs. There's one for childcare. We just signed a big agreement. There's a lot of money on the table for provincial governments that are there. What the provinces have been really united on is really pressing the federal government for our biggest costs are healthcare. So the federal government provides, kind of a funding for transfer payments through the healthcare system. And all provinces, no matter what political stripe, have said they really need to kind of keep that flow of money flowing in, because we're in a pandemic and the healthcare costs of Manitobans and Canadians overall is such a huge part of our budgets. So those are areas that we really want to continue to work with the federal government on. Again, for the most part, we've worked fairly well with them. We also have worked well with the federal government on infrastructure projects, which we think will create some benefit and long-term benefits, but also create some short and medium-term job growth and economic growth that's there. So we really want to work with them on long-term healthcare funding and making sure infrastructure dollars get out the door, especially when we're we're trying to grow ourselves back out of the crisis, the financial and health crisis that all governments have been facing over the last year and a half to 2 years.
We're running out of time, but I really want to ask you or talk to you about something I found really interesting, that that Manitoba is now home to the world's largest pea protein plant. Just opened up this year. I guess it's a major employer. Tell me a little bit about that investment and whether this is potentially something that is, food processing is something that, you expect will be a big source of investment for the province going forward.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the agribusiness side, the food processing has just been huge. And obviously people are looking to eat healthier. You got Beyond Burgers and all these types of things that people are really just trying to be healthier, quite frankly. And Manitoba has such a competitive advantage in that we've had hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, I think it's upwards of $700 million of capital investments in companies like Riquette and Merit Functioning Foods that have come in with the pea processing. And we have really tried to take this as a competitive advantage that Manitoba has. We've created something called a protein summit, and that really brings world leaders a protein summit, whether it be plant-based or animal-based. We really think it's just such a huge growth industry. I know recently there's been some analysis done that overall that could be upwards of $25 billion, the kind of the global piece of it, and Manitoba and Canada can really take advantage of that. And so we really try to develop a lot of our economic development strategies and a growth strategy around food processing, because it's just been such a growth industry for us that we continue to work with these sectors. And so we really want to focus in on somewhere where we have a competitive advantage. And so far it's worked out quite well. Right now it's created 1,500 jobs here in Manitoba, and there's just huge capital development that's happening. And now they're in the operating component where they're growing this industry. So it's just been wonderful.